December 25, 1943, Camp Hearn, Texas. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Hoffmann stares at what the American guards are calling Christmas dinner. His hands, still skeletal from months in the African desert, won't stop trembling as he looks at the plate in front of him, a slab of roasted turkey thicker than his wrist, mountains of mashed potatoes swimming in real butter, sweet potatoes glazed with actual sugar he hasn't seen in 3 years, green beans that aren't rotten, cranberry sauce gleaming like rubies, fresh baked rolls still warm from the oven, and pie, apple pie with ice cream. For 3 years with Rommel's Afrika Korps, Wilhelm survived on sawdust bread and watery turnip soup. His last meal before capture was 150 grams of black bread, mostly sawdust, and 15 grams of rancid margarine. Now, weighing just 128 pounds, he's facing more food than his entire squad saw in a month. "This cannot be real," he writes in a letter that will reach his mother in bombed-out Hamburg 6 months later. "They are feeding us propaganda food. Tomorrow we will return to turnip water like everyone else." But here's what Wilhelm doesn't understand yet. This isn't propaganda, this is just Tuesday in America. And this single Christmas meal is about to demolish every assumption he holds about American weakness, German superiority, and which side was destined to win this war. If you want to understand how America won World War II before the battles were even over, through abundance so overwhelming it broke the enemy's will to fight, stay with me. Because what happened in American POW camps on Christmas 1943 was psychological warfare more devastating than any bomb. The journey to this moment of revelation began 6 months earlier, May 13, 1943, Tunisia, North Africa. Approximately 275,000 Axis soldiers, including the elite of Rommel's Afrika Korps, surrendered to Allied forces. These weren't green recruits. These were veterans who had conquered France, driven the British back across the Mediterranean, and believed absolutely in German racial superiority. The first shock came immediately. At Allied processing camps in Tunisia, American quartermasters distributed C rations and K rations to German prisoners. These combat rations, which American soldiers constantly complained about, seemed like miracle food to Germans who'd been surviving on 800 calories a day. Gefreiter Karl Schmidt, captured with the 95th Light Division, wrote in a letter home, "The Americans gave us small boxes they called K rations. Inside was more food than I had seen in 2 months. Crackers that weren't moldy, a tin of meat that was actually meat, chocolate, sugar, even cigarettes. They apologized that this was all they had." Apologized. Think about that for a second. American guards were apologizing for the quality of emergency field rations that seemed like feast food to German soldiers. But the real revelation came during the voyage to America. Liberty ships, those mass-produced cargo vessels that German naval intelligence said America couldn't possibly build fast enough, were churning out of American shipyards at rates of 3 per day. They carried up to 30,000 German prisoners monthly across the Atlantic. In the holds hastily converted for prisoner transport, German soldiers encountered American abundance in its most casual, wasteful form. Gefreiter Hans Weber remembered, "The American sailors threw away more food after each meal than my entire company had eaten in a week. Whole loaves of white bread, barely touched, went into the garbage. Sailors complained about having chicken too often. One crushed a chocolate bar under his boot because it had melted slightly. We fought each other to dig through their garbage. Let that sink in." Elite German soldiers, men trained to consider themselves the master race, were fighting each other for scraps from American garbage cans. August 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. As the first major wave of Afrika Korps prisoners disembarked, they encountered a scene that shattered everything Nazi propaganda had told them about America. Dock workers, many of them women and African Americans, whom Nazi ideology had declared incapable of skilled labor, were unloading ships while eating sandwiches thick with meat and cheese. They drank Coca-Cola and threw the bottles into bins without thought. They smoked cigarettes continuously, stubbing them out half-finished. The contrast was impossible to process. According to Nazi racial theory, these inferior people should be starving, desperate, weak. Instead, they were casually wasting resources that Germans would have killed for. The systematic feeding program revealed something even more shocking: American medical abundance. German prisoners received vitamin injections, nutritional supplements, and specialized diets to address deficiency diseases common among men who'd been starving for years. The camp hospitals had more medical supplies than most German field hospitals. Penicillin, that miracle drug Germany couldn't produce, was used freely on prisoner infections. Dr. Heinrich Schmidt, a captured Wehrmacht medical officer, wrote, "They gave us vitamins in bottles, hundreds of pills, like candy. In Germany, we had no vitamins for our own wounded. Here, enemy prisoners received better medical care than German civilians could dream of." By November 1943, the American POW system held 425,000 German prisoners across 700 camps in 46 states. And every single one of them was about to experience something that would change them forever. Christmas. German prisoners had no cultural context for Thanksgiving a month earlier. That uniquely American holiday confused them. But Christmas, they understood. Christmas was a sacred German tradition, celebrated with their families in better times. Now they faced Christmas 1943 in captivity, expecting the bleakest celebration of their lives. After all, they were enemies, prisoners, defeated soldiers. Why would the Americans waste resources on making their Christmas special? They had no idea what was coming. Camp commanders across America received identical orders. Prepare traditional American Christmas dinners for all German prisoners. The menu wasn't rationed prison food. It was the same meal American families were eating that day. Roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes with gravy, sweet potatoes with marshmallows, green bean, casserole, cranberry sauce, fresh rolls with butter, pumpkin pie, apple pie, coffee, milk. Each prisoner received portions that would have fed a German family for a week. The turkey alone exceeded monthly German civilian meat rations. At Camp Hearn, Texas, when the Christmas meal was served, grown men wept. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote from Camp McCain in Mississippi, "The Americans celebrated a holiday by feeding enemy prisoners like nobility. If every American family is eating the same meal across this entire nation, then America is not a country. It's a paradise we can never defeat." But what shocked prisoners even more than the abundance was the casual nature of it all. American guards explained that this was normal, that every American family was eating similar meals simultaneously across the nation, that this wasn't special treatment for prisoners, it was just Christmas in America. The concept that an entire country of 130 million people could simultaneously feast while fighting a global war on two fronts challenged everything the prisoners had been taught about American weakness and resource limitations. The psychological impact went beyond calories. Many German prisoners initially refused the turkey, considering it unfit for human consumption. In Germany, turkey was unknown as food, viewed with the same suspicion Americans might regard eating horse meat. Unteroffizier Franz Weber pushed his portion away, declaring to his bunkmate, "This is bird food for peasants. Where is proper meat?" Within hours, hunger overcame prejudice. Weber watched American guards casually consuming their own turkey dinners with evident enjoyment. The realization struck him like a physical blow. If Americans, whom Nazi propaganda had portrayed as weak and degenerate, relished this food, perhaps his assumptions needed revision. By evening, Weber had consumed 2 helpings. He later wrote, "I discovered that my certainties were as empty as my stomach had been. The peanut butter proved even more bewildering. This strange brown paste, unknown in Germany, appeared on every table alongside the traditional feast. Guards demonstrated its use, spreading it on bread with obvious pleasure. To German palates accustomed to lard or margarine when fortunate, this sweet, protein-rich spread seemed like dessert masquerading as sustenance." Obergefreiter Klaus Müller attempted his first taste with visible skepticism. The texture confounded him. The flavor challenged every assumption about proper food. Yet he watched American guards consuming it with casual indifference, not as luxury, but as commonplace nourishment. Müller would later write, "They eat dessert with their bread and call it normal. What manner of nation possesses such abundance that sweets become everyday fare?" The preparation itself astounded the prisoners. Camp kitchens operated with industrial efficiency that German military cooks could never achieve. Electric ovens maintained perfect temperatures. Mechanical mixers handled massive quantities of potatoes. Steam tables kept food warm for hours without spoilage. The technology exceeded what most German restaurants possessed before the war. Gefreiter Hans Dietrich, assigned to kitchen duty, documented the process with engineers' precision. They cooked 47 turkeys simultaneously in ovens that maintained exact heat. No coal shortages, no wood rationing, just endless electricity flowing like water. The waste astounded me more than the abundance. Potato peels went to garbage, not soup. Vegetable trimmings fed pigs, not people. If you're realizing this story is more incredible than you expected, and you want to hear what happened next when these men learned the full truth about American power, leave a comment below telling me what other Y2 Christmas stories you'd like to hear. It helps more people discover these forgotten moments of history. And subscribe, because I've got more stories coming that will change how you understand this war. The food was devastating to Nazi ideology, but the gifts proved even more psychologically destructive. American church groups, civic organizations, and Red Cross chapters had sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German prisoners. 500,000, 500,000 packages, for enemy soldiers who had tried to destroy America. Each package contained chocolates, cigarettes, toiletries, playing cards, and handwritten notes from American families whose sons were fighting and dying in Europe at that very moment. The packages arrived without regard to rank or political affiliation. A former SS officer received the same generosity as a conscripted farmer's son. This egalitarian kindness from enemies whose families were dying in European battles shattered the last remnants of Nazi racial theory. Hauptmann Werner Klein held a package from the Methodist Women's Circle of Abilene, Texas. Inside, homemade cookies wrapped in wax paper, a hand-knitted scarf, and a card reading, "To a German soldier far from home, may God bless you this Christmas and bring you safely back to your family." Klein wept openly, the first tears he had shed since childhood. Think about what this meant. American civilians, enduring their own rationing and shortages, had voluntarily shared their Christmas provisions with enemy soldiers. Church ladies had spent precious sugar rations, strictly limited to 2 pounds per month, baking cookies for men who had tried to kill their sons just months earlier. This demonstration of strength through mercy proved more devastating than any military defeat. Only a nation absolutely certain of victory could afford such magnanimity toward enemies. Only a society with unlimited resources could waste abundance on captives. The message was clear. America possessed such overwhelming power that it could treat warfare as an inconvenience rather than an existential struggle. The Christmas celebration extended beyond sustenance into realms of cultural exchange that German prisoners could never have imagined. Local American families began arriving at camp gates, carrying additional gifts and requesting permission to sing Christmas carols for the prisoners. The sight of enemy civilians voluntarily approaching a military installation to show kindness to captured soldiers defied every principle of warfare the Germans understood. At Camp Aliceville in Alabama, the Methodist choir performed Silent Night in both German and English, their voices carrying across the barracks in the crisp December air. Prisoners pressed against windows, listening to their own lullabies sung by the mothers and wives of men fighting their countrymen across the Atlantic. The cognitive dissonance proved overwhelming for many. Unteroffizier Paul Fisher later wrote, "They sang our songs better than we remembered them. These people whom we were taught to hate preserved our culture while we tried to destroy theirs. The shame burned worse than hunger ever had." The camp exchanges became windows into American consumer abundance that challenged everything the prisoners thought they knew about wartime scarcity. With their 80 cents daily wages, prisoners could purchase items that had vanished from Germany years ago. Chocolate bars sold for 5 cents each. A German prisoner's single day's earnings could buy 16 Hershey bars, more chocolate than most German children had seen in their entire lives. Ice cream proved even more psychologically devastating. In Germany, this frozen luxury had been reserved for the wealthy elite before the war and had disappeared entirely by 1941. In American camps, ice cream was routine summer fare. Camp Shelby's canteen sold over 5,000 ice cream bars weekly to German prisoners who hadn't tasted frozen desserts since childhood. Gefreiter Fritz Müller wrote to his wife, "Yesterday I bought ice cream. Ice cream. In Germany, even party officials cannot obtain ice cream. But here, enemy prisoners buy it for pocket change. The Americans have so much cocoa, they waste it on prisoners." Christmas 1944 delivered the final psychological blow. While the Battle of the Bulge raged in Europe, Germany's desperate last offensive that would ultimately fail, and German cities faced starvation from Allied bombing, American camps served holiday feasts that exceeded even the previous year's abundance. The menu had grown rather than diminished, despite America fighting intensely on two fronts: turkey, ham, roast beef, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, stuffing, gravy, green beans, corn, cranberry sauce, 3 varieties of pie, ice cream, coffee, milk, and wine for officers. The prisoners sat in stunned silence as American guards explained that civilian rationing barely restricted this abundance. Americans complained about sugar rationing that provided £2 monthly per person, more than triple the German civilian allowance when available. American meat rationing at 28 ounces weekly exceeded what Germans received monthly. Hauptmann Werner Müller wrote, "The Americans have so much food, they can feed enemies better than we fed ourselves in peacetime. They conquered us with abundance before their armies arrived." But local communities contributed beyond official rations with generosity that defied military logic. The Methodist women of Hearne, Texas, delivered 2,000 homemade cookies to Camp Hearne. Concordia's Lutheran congregation provided hand-knitted scarves for every prisoner. Even communities struggling with their own rationing shared their Christmas allocation with enemy prisoners. This civilian kindness toward men who had tried to destroy their country represented strength through mercy that Nazi ideology couldn't explain. At Camp Dubois, Wyoming, 3 feet of snow fell on Christmas Eve 1944, snowbound prisoners and American camp staff together for several days. On Christmas Eve, POW Rudolf Ritschl noted, "They all celebrated together quite according to German custom." The men on both sides were deeply impressed by the entertainment presentations. Lieutenant Harold Harlemert, the camp commander, provided details about the Christmas program the POWs put on in their mess hall. The prisoners set up a special table for American personnel and shared their Christmas items and foods with them. The POWs even provided typed printed programs which included acts and poems that teased both German prisoners and US military personnel. A small orchestra performed Christmas music. The YMCA had provided the instruments. The prisoners sang German Christmas songs, and for a few hours, in the middle of a world war, enemies became human beings sharing a meal. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Men who had arrived believing in German superiority and American decadence now understood that their entire worldview had been constructed from lies. Every meal had been a lesson in democratic productivity. Every full belly had provided testimony to freedom's capacity for creation rather than destruction. Section 5. The Cruel Return Home, 18 Caen 2030. The repatriation process that began in late 1945 created a cruel irony that would haunt these men for decades. As ships prepared to carry German prisoners back to their devastated homeland, camp commanders instituted gradual ration reductions to help prisoners readjust to the starvation awaiting them. The same kitchens that had demonstrated abundance now taught survival techniques for a ruined country. Dr. Wilhelm Hoffmann, the senior German medical officer at Camp Shelby, wrote with clinical precision, "We must teach our men to starve again. Their stomachs have expanded, their bodies grown accustomed to plenty. Returning to German rations may prove fatal to some. We are preparing them for a different kind of warfare, the battle against hunger in their own land." The farewell dinners held at each camp represented a final demonstration of American generosity that would echo in these men's memories forever. At Camp Hearne's farewell celebration in February 1946, the menu surpassed even Christmas abundance: shrimp cocktail, prime rib, lobster tail, baked potato with butter and sour cream, asparagus, Caesar salad, chocolate cake, ice cream, wine, and endless coffee. Men who had learned to control their emotions during 3 years of warfare wept openly at the tables. Obergefreiter Friedrich Müller captured the moment's bitter poetry. "Our last American meal exceeded any German feast from memory. Tomorrow we return to turnip soup and sawdust bread. America sends us home with full bellies and broken hearts." The journey home revealed the complete scope of Germany's destruction. As trains crossed from American-controlled Austria into Germany proper, returning prisoners pressed faces against windows, witnessing a moonscape of ruins where cities once stood. At Frankfurt Station, civilians with skeletal frames begged for food scraps from Allied military trains. Children with swollen starvation bellies extended trembling hands toward the windows of prisoner transport cars. Unteroffizier Paul Weber documented the horror. "We returned to hell wearing American-fed flesh. My wife thought I was an imposter, too healthy, too well-nourished for a returning soldier. My son, born while I was gone, has rickets from malnutrition. The shame burns worse than any battle wound." The physical reversal proved swift and brutal. Military government surveys tracked former prisoners losing 30 to 50 pounds within 6 months of return. Bodies built on American rations couldn't survive on German scarcity. Heinrich Weber returned to Hamburg weighing 186 pounds, up from his capture weight of 134. 6 months later, he weighed 138 pounds. "The American body couldn't survive on German rations," he explained years later. "I gave my food to my children, lived on potato peels and stolen grain. Better to have known continuous hunger than to know fullness and lose it." Yet these men carried something more valuable than physical health back to their ruined homeland. Knowledge that abundance was achievable through democratic systems rather than conquest. Many former prisoners became crucial architects of Germany's reconstruction, implementing American agricultural methods they had observed during captivity. When the Marshall Plan was announced in 1947, America's program to rebuild Europe, including its former enemies, former prisoners understood its significance better than most Germans. They had experienced American generosity firsthand and knew the nation could afford to rebuild Europe because they had witnessed the casual waste that demonstrated unlimited resources. Studies conducted throughout the 1950s revealed that former prisoners held dramatically different attitudes than Germans captured by other powers. They were more likely to support democracy, embrace economic cooperation with America, and maintain positive views of their former captors. The Christmas experiences had proved transformative in ways that formal education could never achieve. On this Christmas Day 2025, as you sit with your own holiday meal, I want you to think about something. 82 years ago, America was fighting the largest war in human history on 2 fronts simultaneously. Resources were stretched. Young men were dying on battlefields across the globe. Families back home were rationing sugar, meat, and gasoline. And yet, America still found a way to serve Christmas dinner to its enemies. Not minimal rations, not survival food. The same feast American families were eating, with gifts, with kindness, with dignity. That wasn't weakness. That was the most devastating display of power the world has ever seen. America was telling Nazi Germany, "We're so strong, so abundant, so certain of victory, that we can afford to be generous to people who tried to destroy us." And it worked. Those Christmas dinners, those gifts from church ladies in Texas, those carols sung by Methodist choirs in Alabama, did more to demolish Nazi ideology than 1,000 bombs. Because you can rebuild a destroyed city, you can't rebuild a destroyed worldview. Those German soldiers returned home as unwitting ambassadors of democracy, carrying the truth that freedom creates abundance, while tyranny creates only scarcity. If this story moved you, if you think more people need to understand how America actually won World War II through abundance, not just firepower, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message on Christmas Day, and leave a comment. What other forgotten Christmas stories from WW2 should I cover? Merry Christmas. And remember, in American POW camp mess halls on Christmas 1943 and 1944, the seeds of lasting peace were planted through the simple revolutionary act of sharing holiday abundance with those who came to destroy it.